Our speaker today is Paul Kirch. Paul is a 25-year veteran of the marketing research industry. After 10 years in operation roles at the world-renowned Gallup organization, he found his true love for the sales side of our industry. Since 2000, he served in outside sales roles and sales leadership roles for firms like Harris Interactive, Common Knowledge Research, and Taluna. In 2009, he decided to make a broader impact in the industry by starting Actus Sales Intelligence. It's a firm dedicated to helping people sell smarter. He's the author of a soon-to-be-released book called Ninja Follow-Up, and also can be heard on his podcast show for entrepreneurs and business leaders called Boss Academy Radio at bossacademy.com. It's all yours, Paul.
I want to thank you so much. The Southwest MRA, I've been obviously a member and been actively involved in the past. I served as president of the Northwest MRA. So the MRA is a organization that I hold near and dear to my heart. In fact, I always attribute a lot of my, I guess we'll call it success, recognition, and ability to actually grow a business from being a part of the MRA. When I first got involved back in 2000, coming out of Gallup, I mean, even though I was part of this organization that had such a great reputation, was well known, they really kind of limited our visibility to the rest of the industry. I always jokingly say that we didn't know the rest of the industry existed. And then when I got out and I got involved in the MRA, it's really, I guess, transformed my life and my business. I met my wife through the MRA, so I'm really honored to be a part of this. So thank you to the Southwest MRA for inviting me along. So let's see if I can get this to advance here. All right. So my company is called Actus Sales Intelligence, and as Tara mentioned, I started this firm back in 2009 with the sole intent of really providing a service that could give back. I first thought, well, gosh, if I start my own company, what do I want to do? Do I want to sell research services? But I'd really learned to love the art of sales and the science behind sales. I had the privilege of working under a couple of great mentors. There are not a lot of great sales mentors and leaders in the research industry. I mean, no disrespect to anyone, but it's an industry that really grew from referrals. There was often really not a need for a dedicated salesperson. Now that's changed, and the world has definitely changed within our little geographic or core area of business. But the reality is there's still not a lot of really polished sales leaders. So I actually mentored under a couple of people that helped me get off on a right start. But then I also became a sponge. I started going through sales training. I started reading everything I could. I wanted to become much more effective. So one of the things that I really feel I've developed a strong belief in is effective follow-up strategies. And so when I was talking to Tara and the team over at Southwest MRA about a idea for a webinar, this was one that really stood out because I'm actually in the process of very close to publishing a book called Ninja Follow-Up. And the whole idea there is to provide effective follow-up strategies that maybe people don't even expect, and some things that are creative. So hopefully today you walk away with some good ideas, some great reminders of things that you should be doing and that you're not. But ultimately the goal here is to give you something that will help you in terms of engaging and really, I guess, networking better. So my career actually started in operations. So my background is 10 years of time spent. I was a telephone interviewer, a programmer, a project manager. So my perspective from this industry is not just from the sales side. And I think it's important that distinction comes into play because the way of selling today versus the old way of selling, the always be closing mindset, that has long since disappeared. So my beliefs and strategies really work today because they are about relationships, they're about fostering trust, they're about providing value. So I want you to be thinking that in terms of how you follow up with people and how you engage. So I actually presented a webinar on a strategy I called WINS, and it's really about how do you more effectively network and engage people at events and then obviously engage them in follow-up. But sometimes in the process of following up with people, you feel like, can you hear me? I mean, is anyone out there? And it's really frustrating when you're not getting a response. But I want you to pay close attention to some points that I make in a little bit about that very element. The idea that can you hear me, of course, they can hear you. They know you're there. But sometimes people get busy and they get bogged down with their own life. They've got a boss breathing down their neck, or they've got a project they've got to get out the door. You're not the priority that you might want to believe you are and think you are at the time. So let's think about that in terms of your prospecting and following up. One of the things about following up in general is consistency can actually become a strategic mindset. If you get consistent, you get a process that works, and you follow it, it can be something that becomes a strategic plan. Yeah, tactically, there's some tactics and things you'll be doing, but the strategy is that you want to be seen as somebody that's reliable. And so that is about engaging trust. Now, I did mention that I presented on this win strategy, and I used this slide in there, but this slide is relevant to what we're talking about today. The follow-up frustration wheel. Often when you meet somebody or you have an engaged conversation, they seem excited. They actually might have even told you to call, hey, I've got something, give me a call. They have work for you. All these things are conversations that happen, and then all of a sudden, they stop taking your call. They stop responding to your emails, and you start to go, God, what's going on here? It's like, is it me? Maybe they're not interested in what I have to offer. Maybe you're actually getting far down the path and you think, oh, I've got this great opportunity, and you find out they're not really involved in making the final decision. Somebody else has. So you've done all this work to build this relationship, and the next thing you know, you've got to kind of start over at ground zero. They're happy with their current supplier. Well, what do you do with that? So there's a lot of things that happen when you're following up or when you're engaging with somebody that you've had some sort of interaction with that can lead to a sense of wasting your time. It's really not a waste of time, though, and I'm going to share with you why. So when I mentioned the win strategy, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, but if you want, this presentation is out on SlideShare. I've got a shortened URL there. I believe that the MRA will be sharing this deck with you guys, so you have access to these links. But wins is a strategy that I developed it's really about working the room, initiating conversations, always leveraging a next step strategy. And just to touch on that, one of the things that's a huge opportunity in networking is you go in with a plan of how am I going to connect with this person later. And one of the best things you can do at a networking event is instead of spending the whole night talking to 2 or 3 people, work the room, spend 5 to 7 minutes with an individual and say, you know what, I want to talk with you further, but we're both here to meet some other people. Can we set up a time? Do you have your calendar on you right now? Schedule a meeting right then and there. That's your next step. And then really focus on developing a selfless mindset. Unfortunately, in sales and business, sometimes we get really fixated on our offering instead of really fixating on what their needs are. So think about those in terms of following up. So I love to golf. I can't say I'm a great golfer, but I love to go out and chase the white ball around. But I came up with this acronym because I think it's very appropriate for the follow-up process. Persistence is one of the key elements in follow-up, and I know that not everybody feels comfortable with this, and I'm going to address that, I assure you. But persistence, just short of the point of follow-up just short of the point of annoyance, is something that I tell a lot of people, and I say it somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but in reality, it does come down to that. You have to be actually persistent and following up. What are the actions and steps that you're taking to follow up? And then is there regularity in the process? Obviously, if you're a seller doer, you're somebody that actually manages project work and also is responsible for selling business. It's really hard to do both, and it's hard to keep that pipeline alive. And then sequencing, and we're going to talk about sequencing and what that can actually mean in terms of providing some automation or some support to your other efforts. So, what you're offering is value, something that you're really relaying, and not value in terms of you feel really good about your offering, but you know that it's something that meets their needs. And that's a big part of the communication when it comes to following up. Make the conversation about them. It's less about your own needs. If your needs are to sell them and to get their business, often that's very alienating, and you may not even realize it's happening. But just focus on how can you provide the most value to them. One of the most important things a salesperson or somebody that's responsible for following up with prospects or clients needs to be remembering that their job in part is staying top of mind. Top of mind awareness is one of the most important strategies in marketing, but also in sales. And then ultimately earn their trust. I used to work under a gentleman who was a great mentor and started me off on a great path in my sales career, and one of his philosophies was always be a resource. So at the bottom of this slide, I want you to pay close attention to a phrase that you may hear again. A lack of response is not a lack of interest. And it's very important you remember that. A lack of response does not equal a lack of interest. I'm going to give an example. And I don't want to get ahead of the other content, but I was recently at an event in New York, and I had been in conversation with this woman that I've known for years, and we've never really worked together, but we had a conversation in, I think it was October or November last year, and we spoke a couple of times. She was really excited. She was like, oh, I really need what you're offering. You know, my business is a little slow, and I really want some help on the sales side. I'm like, great. She goes, but I'm really bogged down right now with project work, and I'd love to talk with you in January. No problem. So I scheduled to talk with her in January. In January, I called. She didn't respond. She didn't answer. No problem. I left her a voicemail message. No response. I sent her an email message a couple days later saying, hey, you know, I just was following up from our conversation, want to schedule time. No response. I called a couple more times. From the time in January where I started calling with her and emailing her to the time I saw her at this event in New York, you know, a couple of months had passed, and I had reached out a few times, and ultimately I was starting to get to the point where it's like, you know, maybe she's not interested, or maybe I've done something to alienate her, but then in the back of my mind I'm like going, don't fall into that trap, because a lack of response is not a lack of interest. And sure enough, I see her at this event, and she comes running over and hugs me and says, Paul, I'm so sorry. I really owe you an apology that I have not responded. I'm really interested, but just right now I'm so stressed out about my business, and I need to get through a few things, but I promise you we'll talk. That type of interaction has happened to me so many times in my sales career. And between myself and salespeople I've managed and worked with, I'd say thousands of times, you get to the point where you get an apology from somebody because they haven't responded to you. You put yourself in a position, I often jokingly say, hey, I've got them. But the reality is you have a door opening and you have an opportunity, because when somebody feels bad that they haven't responded to you, they're going to feel a little sense of commitment or a sense of I guess, they're going to feel like they should talk to you. And I think it's important that you take advantage of that and not do it in a way that's, you know, malicious or disrespectful, but it's an opportunity. And part of your job is to get their business. And if you believe you're providing value, that's the important thing to just follow through. So let's look at yourself. You know, what's your own approach like? How often do you follow up with people? Are you consistent? You know, what are the methods that you prefer, or more importantly, what are the ones you avoid? A lot of people shy away from the phone. They don't like calling. They think people don't respond to the phone, and we're going to talk about that. Are you focusing only on the low-hanging fruit? Hey, great. If you've got leads that are warm and you've got all these opportunities, that's amazing. But what happens when those dry up? What happens when you get to the point where you need to actually be selling to people that you haven't really had any interaction with? And ultimately, what assumptions are you making? And that could be a lot of things, but really the assumptions might be tied to, hey, they're not responding to me. They must not be interested. When maybe that's not true at all. Persistence. I talked about how that is one of the most important things in the sales process and the follow-up process especially. So just looking at a study by the National Sales Executive Association. Now this may not necessarily translate to our industry because they're talking about multiple streams of, you know, types of sales, but if you look in here, interestingly enough, 2 to 3% of the sales are made on the first contact. Obviously, 2 to 3% of the sales might be, maybe you're getting a portion of the proposals on those first couple calls. 5% of the sales are made on third contact. 80% are made on the 5th to 12th contact. And what's interesting, I actually have a lead generation team. We focus on developing leads that we start from often a very cold place. Sometimes it's a list that we've secured that there's no relationship. It's 8 to 10 solid efforts at a minimum to get to the point where we've got these people scheduled for appointments. Now, yes, we get some earlier, but the reality is if we stop short of 8 to 10, we're really limiting our opportunity. Because the thing is, you have to work a lot of times to get to the point where somebody is warmed up enough, they have enough trust in you, they've seen enough collateral from you that they're willing to work with you. This is why advertising is still important. This is why social media can be a big part of your process. This is why the telephone is one of the most important sales tools you'll ever have, and that's not changing. Yes, it's different today. People don't answer the way they used to. Yes, you get more voicemail, but we're going to talk about that. The voicemail is a huge opportunity. So most salespeople, experienced salespeople that I talk to, I will tell you that they fall in that middle of the range. They'll make 5 contacts, they'll make 4 contacts, and then they'll move on. Some of them make less. I mean, I get calls all the time from people that it's apparent that they're just dialing through a list. I hear from them once, I never hear from them again. I might receive an email, no other correspondence. It's not enough. So if you want to get effective at follow-up, you need to get better at persistence. Persistence is something that you definitely want to take advantage of in terms of your process. And it's not always in your comfort zone, and I get that. But if you really ultimately believe you're providing a valuable service that they can benefit from, and you'd rather have their business than it go to your competitor, you owe it to yourself to keep being more persistent and make follow-ups. Okay. Why it's vital? If you, like I said, if you believe you can help them, your competitors are out there doing exactly what you're not doing. And I mentioned top-of-mind awareness. If they don't think of you, how in the world are you going to win their business? If it comes time to a proposal coming across their desk, as much of a relationship as you believe you have with them, they may be thinking of someone else that's more convenient because there's a business card sitting on their desk. Somebody just came in and met with them. You might have a relationship with somebody, you've worked with them, and you think, I'm getting all their business. And they try someone else because it's convenient. Often, you miss out on an opportunity if you're not top of mind. And waiting for the phone to ring, it never drives sales, unfortunately. Now, if you're actually in a dedicated sales role, or you're somebody that runs a company and part of your job is to actually reach out and prospect, you know that sales is timing. How many times has it happened to you where you've actually picked up the phone, called someone, and said, you know what, great timing, I just got something in. Well, what happens if your competitor made that call? Would it have come to you? Probably not. Your competitor would have probably gotten that business. Now, I talked about value, and I want to emphasize that you really do have to show the value you provide to them. But often that requires getting to know what their needs really are. And if you make a couple of calls here, wait 6 months to reach out, you maybe send an email here, and you don't follow up, and then you're surprised that there's no response, or when you do talk to them, they seem less interested than they ever were. Because forgotten efforts are truly wasted efforts, unfortunately. And until you are a priority to them, you're not. So how do you become a priority? You show value, and you're there when they need you, or you're at least on their mind. Okay, some more things about you. So what methods do you use? You know, if you're somebody who's comfortable smiling and dialing, I mean, I know a couple of people actually on this call that they are comfortable working the phones heavily. And that takes a special, I guess, strength, resolve, you know, because it's not always easy. Sometimes you get rejection. Sometimes you feel like nobody's answering. You know, there's ways to make the process of using the phone more fun. I mean, I actually challenge myself sometimes. I'll say, okay, I'm going to make X number of calls and see how many people I can reach, and then you start to track that. And you can have, you know, if you have salespeople on your staff, you can actually have them kind of competing with each other. And you make it somewhat fun, and you find ways to really make it work for you. And one of the best tips that I've ever come up with for dialing on the phone, and I'm sure I'm not the person who created this ultimately, but it's something that years ago I started doing for myself, is I started thinking that, you know, every no I get is that much closer to a win. And the reason I came up with that is because when I was working at Harris Interactive, we started tracking the number of calls, and we started to see that patterns. Metrics actually really work in sales, and you start to see patterns. A certain number of calls was leading to me getting to a point where I had meetings or proposals. And so I started celebrating the no's. And if you get to the point where you go, yeah, I just got another no, it changes your mindset from like, oh God, I'm just so frustrated with this process. So you can do things to get yourself motivated to pick up the phone. Email is a great tool. I'm not going to discount it, but I do want to preface. I was reading an article by Dan Kennedy. Dan Kennedy is one of the best copywriters in the marketing space. He's written several books on copywriting, and his perspective on email is it's today's version of junk mail. And I think that there's some truth to that. It's so easy to delete email. My morning starts with going through and deleting a lot of emails that I don't even read. I see who they're from, I see the subject line, and so I dismiss them, and I think we all do that. So it's easy to miss emails. It's easy to get lost in an email. It's also easy for them not to respond. Now, I had somebody tell me that, well, young people today, that's how they want us to communicate with them. Great. So why? We're going to talk about that, but ultimately, it's easy for them to avoid it. Direct mail, yeah, there's some costs associated with direct mail, but direct mail actually works more effectively today than it has over the last several years because there's less of it in terms of B2B. So if you're sending out a postcard, it may not get a response, it may not lead to instant action, but they're reading it, they're seeing it. They may not see your email. So do you just rely on direct mail alone? That's not what I'm saying, but I'm saying you use it in conjunction with other methods. I'm not saying you avoid email, but if you're avoiding the phone or avoiding other tools, maybe that's a mistake. Now, newsletters are a great way to engage people that they might have expressed interest, you might have a relationship with them, but right now they don't have anything. It's just a value-driven message that allows you to stay in touch with them. So newsletters can be extremely effective. And the social media engagement on the B2B side, it's interesting. It can work very effectively. I've actually got 4 Facebook pages I manage. I'm on LinkedIn. I don't actively use Twitter like I used to, but I will tell you that from a top-of-mind awareness and engagement opportunity, social media can really work. Okay, I mentioned young people, email. Look, the reality is, if it's their contact preference, yeah, I get it. It's their contact preference because they don't want to be facing sales calls. And you have a tough job. So if you're torn on, well, gosh, I don't really feel comfortable being salesy, I don't want to be pushy, I get that. But being pushy is not the same as being persistent because you believe that you're providing them a good service. So yes, they are going to say, oh, please, I'd rather you communicate with me by email. Okay, fine. But that's because they can get away from it quicker. They can delete it. They don't have to be responsive to it. As you respect their request, does your competitor win the race? That's a question you need to ask yourself. If you're shying away from certain methods and tools, maybe there's an answer there that if you try some different things, get comfortable doing it, you might see a bigger impact than you have been. So I want to share a couple of tools that actually work and some things that I've found that are effective. And I unfortunately don't have time to go through a ton here, but I wanted to give you a couple of opportunities. But before I really dive into that, I want to talk about voicemail. I have people tell me all the time, nobody answers voicemail, nobody responds to voicemail anymore. What's the point? Well, I used to really promote the idea that, I can teach you to leave voicemail messages that get responded to, and I can. Absolutely. I actually get a lot of people responding to my voicemails. Now, truth be told, I've changed my viewpoint on voicemail because as it's become more and more evident that people are just sending calls to voicemail, I use voicemail as a top-of-mind awareness tool. Now, let's think about that. You send somebody an email, they have the opportunity to just click delete. They don't have to pay any attention to anything you say. You send somebody or leave somebody a voicemail message, they're going to at least hear your name. Hi, this is Paul Kirch with Actus Sales Intelligence. Delete. Okay, they didn't listen to my message, but they heard my name. Now, I was at an event recently, and I was talking to a couple of people, and I know these two people I've actually been reaching out to, and I've never talked to them, but I left a couple of voicemails, and the one person looked at me and goes, I know you from somewhere. How do I know that name? And I said, well, I'm out there. I've got a radio show and a podcast show, so, a lot of people in the industry know who I am. But I'm sitting smiling inside because I knew that I'd left him a message and that he didn't necessarily put two and two together where, but he knew my name. Now, all of a sudden, there's this instant connection. There's this kind of credibility piece that comes from just being known. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's deeper than that, but if he goes and does a Google search or looks me up, he's going to find a ton of information out there because I am out there, and I do put myself out there a lot of times for a reason, because I want to be seen as somebody that's, a leader. I want to be seen as somebody that's trustworthy. I want to be seen as somebody that provides value, because if I get the opportunity to work with somebody, I'm going to prove to them that that's who I really am. And so putting yourself out there can be a good thing. But the voicemail itself, truly a top-of-mind awareness tool, and it really works. So a return voicemail, it is a goal, but let's not make it the expectation. Like I said, it used to be that's something I really pushed for, but I've learned the power of it. This doesn't mean you just leave rambling messages. You want your message to be strong. You want your message to have some call to action. But ultimately, it can be just as powerful as a top-of-mind tool, because if you send them an email or you reach out to them in some other way, well, they've just heard your name a couple of times instead of just once. When that project comes in, you never know. You might just be the person they're thinking of. Okay, I love this tool. I used Doodle's premium service, and I used some other scheduling tools. Visita is something I've really fallen in love with, and it's not free, but this is an amazing product. I send out a link to people in my email that has a Visita scheduling link, and it goes to this page. So visita.com/Paul Kirch takes you to this page. They can schedule with me. If I was offering them some coaching or training, they could make a payment. They click that book an appointment tab, and it takes them to a page that shows my available times. There's nothing more frustrating, at least to me, when somebody and I are going, okay, let's have a call. Oh, when are you free? Oh, give me some times. Oh, I'm busy that day. So you go this back and forth. Visita has totally changed that. So now I send this tool. Somebody can click on my calendar, see what times I'm available, schedule, and it's seamless. And the follow-up process within this tool is amazing. So this is a great tool to engage people, and I will tell you the conversions on setting appointments for me has gone through the roof. Now I have my radio show, Boss Academy Radio, which now it's moved to the form of a podcast, but it doesn't change the fact that scheduling guests has become so much easier. But on the Actus Sales side, and then I also have a company called Actus 360 that I run, it has made it so easy for people to schedule with me, and it's a game-changing tool. So I encourage you to check out visita.com. It's going to be hard to see this on screen, but I wanted to share a tool that I created. I'm going to kind of walk through it, and then when you get the slide presentation, you'll have this URL shortener link, and you can write that down now. But think in terms of creative outreach. Now, I've gone to some events and met people, and, of course I prioritize. I go, okay, well, these are people that I really want to follow up with. And so I will take this form, I'll send a handwritten note, and then I'll paste a $5 Starbucks gift card on there where it says, on behalf of Team Actus, thanks a latte. And I'll send it out, and in the handwritten note, I'll say something to the effect of, it was really great meeting you. I can't wait for our conversation. Let me buy the first coffee, or the coffee's on me, something to that effect. And I send that out. And because it's handwritten, people get this envelope that's handwritten. They're going to open it. They open this up. They see the handwritten note, which is a nice touch. And they're going, geez, $5 gift card? That's kind of cool. And so there's a sense of, I guess, obligation. There's a sense of intrigue. They want to learn more. It's like, okay, so what's the deal with this? And so I'm encouraging you to take and create some creative ideas. And if you would like this This actually was created in Publisher. If you'd like this template or you want this form, feel free to send me an email to pkirch@actussales.com. My information will be available at the end, but I'm happy to share this with you. Thanksgiving, I sent this out to prospects and clients this year. Now, at the holiday season, a lot of times we're sending stuff that is, very specific to Thanksgiving or Christmas. But I wanted to stand out. I wanted to do something that was a little bit unique. So I sent this, and it's very much non-holiday related. The message is still holiday related, but I wanted to catch their eye. And I had several people respond saying, wow, this is really a great way to engage. It's really creative. And it was intended to capture their attention in ways that maybe a card with pilgrims and food and stuff like that might not. So stand out, get creative, and find some ways to really differentiate yourself in terms of your approach. So your frequency, how often are you reaching out? Are you consistent? I think consistency is going to be something that a lot of people really struggle with, this idea. I get it. You're busy with project work. You're busy with other things. But if you can create a schedule, a way to follow up that may not necessarily be robotic. I mean, you want it to be natural. You want it to make sense. But if you can find some ways of creating some consistency in your process, it can be really, really helpful. And if you created any kind of strategic plan, so, how do you want to be seen? Do you want to be seen as a thought leader? Do you want to be seen as somebody who is very responsive, reliable, trustworthy? Whatever it is, create a strategy and then develop the tactics and processes around that. And then, are you tracking conversions? Are you tracking what works and what doesn't? You're using Salesforce.com or some other CRM system. I spoke with somebody yesterday that tracks. They keep track of all their emails and all their correspondence through Gmail. And I was confused by this, and I started digging in, and turns out that every time they reach out to somebody, they just send them an email, like they might have a call, and they'll send an email follow-up, and they've got that in Gmail, and if they need to reference something, they'll do a search, and they'll find it. Interesting. It's very easy to lose communication. There's no way to really track metrics. So, it's not necessarily the ideal situation, but, it worked for them. But I would encourage you to actually think in terms of conversions, metrics, and finding ways to track what works and what doesn't. Are you memorable? What have you done for them that's different, that stands out, that allows you to create a personal brand? I'm not talking about your professional brand here. Yes, a professional brand matters. I mean, your company you represent, you want to be seen as, if you're with Research Now or any companies like this, you want to be seen as part of this brand that's important. But what's your personal brand? Have you done anything that's memorable? What's your follow-up process like? When you send them content, are you sending something that's personal? Or are you sending something that's just pure marketing based? And are you really focusing on a next step strategy? And are you trying to always reinvent the wheel and try some different things? I will tell you, follow-up is an interesting art in itself because it's ever-changing. There was a time when voicemail was something that people responded to. There was a time when people answered the phone. So following up was different. Today, you use those tools differently. So what's next for you, and how are you always staying ahead of the curve? So in terms of regularity, I think that there's several things that drive it and really will help determine what you're doing and how you do it. And the biggest one is comfort level. If you're not comfortable following up, you're not comfortable picking up the phone, as much as I'd love to sit here and tell you, do it, you're not going to do it, or you're at least not going to do it to the extent you should. So you need to find ways to say, okay, I know I need to do this. I know I need to quit smoking. Here's how I'm going to quit smoking. I know I need to pick up the phone and make calls. Here's how I'm going to do it. Several things you can do. In terms of just the argument that I'm so busy and I have to be responsive to clients, it's like they send me stuff. And one of the things that I'm really good at is responding quickly. I had somebody tell me that was their differentiator, is that they respond faster than anyone else. It's a nice gesture, but the reality is you're hurting your own business. Block out times where you are going to be making calls. Okay, so Tuesday mornings from 10 to noon, that's my calling time for the early part of the week. And then maybe Wednesday afternoon, I'm spending an hour. You block that time out. You don't get bogged down checking email. Look, if you don't respond to an email in 5 seconds, in 2 minutes, is the world going to come to an end? Are your clients really going to leave you? Yes, you're going to have some clients who put pressure on you because they want a response now. But you have it within your right to manage your business the way that you see you need to be effective. And part of that is making determinations on, look, I'm controlling when I work. I'm controlling when I respond, not them. And unfortunately, we live in a world where it's become that, if we don't respond immediately, people start to freak out. But I will tell you, as you start to doing more and more of this, blocking out time, you're going to find that people are much more understanding, and they care less than you think. In fact, have you ever taken vacation? You ever taken a day off? Did you respond in 2 seconds at that point? Maybe you did, maybe you didn't. I'm pretty sure that in most cases you did not, and nothing really changed. Is the volume manageable? You're bogged down with 40 hours of project work. How are you going to make 20 hours of phone calling? You're not. So find ways to make sure that you're committing to things that are manageable. You may follow up less than the person who's probably going to be more effective in getting response, but it's because you can't do more. But don't make the excuse that it's anything more than that. If it's truly that you don't have the time, fair enough. Find ways to work it in, find ways to work around it, but don't make excuses for yourself. What's the warmth of the lead? The warmth of the lead can often determine the effort you put in, at least in the early stages, and your approach is going to be different with a warm lead versus cold, and we're going to talk about that briefly. Are you known? What have you done to put yourself out there? Are you writing articles? Are you speaking? Are you doing anything that helps you stand out as a leader and as a professional? Because that does matter when they look you up. And you have tools for managing the process, and then ultimately, are you able to track some of this stuff over time? See what's working and what's not. Because what works for one person may not work for the next person. That could be because of execution. It could be because of other things. But ultimately, you can make those determinations. And metrics, they can be proven over a period of time. And they directly determine your sales targeting. Okay. This is a topic in itself. This is a much more than a 1-hour webinar. But I wanted to give a couple of examples of some follow-up, I guess we'll call them series of contacts. And in this case, we're talking about using phone and email. I have direct mail and email in here as an option. So a lot of times, if I make an initial phone call, I will leave a voicemail. Now, there's a more aggressive approach versus a less aggressive approach, and you can call it what you will. Not everyone is receptive to having a salesperson call, leave a voicemail message, and then turn around and send an email. Now, I will tell you that you can get away with that if you preface in the email, look, I'm sending you this email because I think it's valuable if you see this. Or, I just left you a voicemail. I'm sorry for the redundancy, but I wanted to send you something that had my contact information. I think that's acceptable and it's okay and it works really well, but it's not in everyone's comfort zone because they know that they don't like to be on the receiving end of that. So I sometimes will give it a day or 2 days to send an email if I haven't received a call back. In 3 business days, I'm going to send another call again, and I normally will leave another voicemail. And in my voicemails, one of the things I'll do is I'll let them know that if I don't hear back from you, I'm going to call you on such and such day. And then I try and call on that day. And if they know that over time, look, this guy's going to keep calling, I'm going to call him back. Often that's what it takes for them to get to the point where they feel comfortable calling you back. So a week later, I'll call again, and then maybe I'm leveraging email. And you start to pepper in more communication, and over time, you just start to work this. And then you get to that point where you've had your 8 to 10 outreaches. And I will tell you that it rarely takes this before you've had an interaction with them. It rarely takes this much effort. Now, before you get the sale, sure, but not necessarily the interaction. Now, cold leads is a different situation. In cold leads, I'll make an initial call, but I don't leave a voicemail because they don't know who I am. And I know that that's not necessarily going to benefit me. But I will follow up with an introductory email at that point immediately. And I make sure that they at least have my name and information. And then once again, a couple days later, 3 days later, I'm calling in. At this point, I'm actually referencing that email I sent and leaving them a voicemail. Now, cold leads is where you really want to take advantage of things like your marketing newsletter, direct mail, and finding ways to pepper them in there. Now, if you're worried about canned spam, there's nothing in this that is a violation of canned spam. You're not selling them anything in a newsletter. You're not pressuring them to buy anything. It's not a violation. However, if you're using an email service like Vertical Response, Aweber, or some of these, they don't care if they're getting enough complaints. They can blacklist you, or they can force you to have a dedicated IP that you send out through your own email servers. All those things are possible, but as long as you're not doing this in a way that's really, I guess, harmful or damaging to your reputation, you can get away with a lot of this. And if you send these emails out, to newsletters out, a lot of times you can add them to the newsletter list without them opting in. However, I always prefer to have people opted in if possible. But it isn't always a mistake to send an email or direct mail to them or some sort of newsletter offering. So then you continue to work these contacts and leads, and at this point, you want to get to the point where you see that cold leads actually they require a stronger call to action. It's very much a research-based message, and what I mean by that is you've done your homework. You know who they are. I cannot tell you the number of calls I get where somebody clearly doesn't know my business. Hey, I'd like to work with you, and I know you do a lot of research and provide surveys. We'd like to be the person that does all your work for you. Well, that's not the business I'm in. If they did a 2-minute search on my site and Google, they would know more about my business than that. So do your homework with the cold leads. With warm leads, they kind of already know a little bit about you. You know a little bit about them. Yes, you want to do your homework as well, but there's an expressed interest. And this is where a top-of-mind strategy really ensures that they're going to be engaged. So going back, 8 to 10 attempts is recommended for maximum impact. And remember, voicemail is top-of-mind awareness. And messages that they need to be relevant, they need to have a call to action. And the other thing I want to emphasize is that a lack of response is not a lack of interest. Just remember that. So scheduling is determined by opportunity size. If you can only manage so much lead generation or so much follow-up, you have to make some prioritization sometimes. Sometimes you're moving from a manual, I'm calling, I'm emailing, to more of an automated process with some of these people that haven't responded because you don't have the time to manage the follow-up process, and that's quite all right. Which is going to be more effective? Of course, the manual, very focused on you making those calls and efforts, but it's okay to put them into a marketing string. The potential opportunity size, available time for prospecting. Like I said, if you're a seller doer, I get it. You're busy with project work. A pipeline while you're working on a project is hard to manage unless you're working really long days and making a lot of sacrifices. When your project's over, then you go back to working on the pipeline. Sometimes that's a really hard place to be, and it's easy to be forgotten if you're not staying in touch. Your comfort level drives a lot. Ultimately, your sales targets, what are you trying to achieve in terms of sales? If you don't know how many calls it takes to get to the point where you got a meeting or a proposal, you can start to track that stuff, and then you can reverse engineer it and go, okay, here's my sales target. Here's ultimately, if I make this number of calls a day, this is what I'm going to get to. That helps you really determine what you need to put in terms of effort. The reasons you're calling, marketing support available, and then what are the lead sources? So are you getting leads from a conference? I mean, are these all business cards? Do you have some sort of inbound strategy where people are opting in? Ultimately, you want to leverage the next step strategy with all the efforts that you have and all the tools you have available to you, but you need to make a determination what works for you. So in terms of sequencing is something that is really more specific to email in terms of developing a automated sequence. If you want to learn more about it, there's a great tool out there that I'm going to share in just a minute, but sending out a sequence is often driven by it's automated, it's triggered by events. Have they requested information? So they opted in for something. Okay, so now how are you following up with them? Sales milestones, we talked about that. Promotion and marketing initiatives. And then, have they given you permission to contact them? Have they given you permission to follow up or not? And if not, then you probably want to be respectful of that and find other ways to engage them before you put them into an automated process. And then, are you doing this in conjunction with other sales activity? So is your automated process, your sequence, actually supporting, or is it a standalone effort? So an example of sales support sequencing, you might have an email you send out. Now, this might be one to engage and provide information. I'm showing here on screen a thank you for opting in. It's information based. It might be something about your company. The next one's more educational by nature. If you've got a white paper or you've got some sort of thought leadership piece you've sent that you've created, you can share that and say, oh, hey, by the way, I thought you might really find an interest in this. It can also be the idea of a touch in some form. Like, you know what, I know we haven't talked, but I was actually reading this really great press release on this company that's in your space that I think you might be interested in, and you send that on. It's a reason to reach out. It's not a salesy message, and it's something that really is going to set them at ease because it's non-threatening. And at this point, maybe you pepper in a phone call. You trigger the phone call through your CRM, say, okay, I've sent these 2 emails. Now the CRM is alerting me that it's time to make a call. I make the call, and then you can reference all that correspondence, and it's a great way to connect with them. And now maybe you've got an event that maybe you're hosting a webinar. Maybe you're providing some sort of leadership conference, or you're doing a demo, and you can invite them to that event. And then direct mail might be sent out at the same time. This direct mail actually might create a great top-of-mind awareness. So how is this all tying together? Well, they're hearing your name on the phone. They're seeing your name on the emails. Now all of a sudden they've got this direct mail piece. And it starts to just become something where they build a relationship with you in their minds before they really even know you. And then you focus on an email that's driving engagement. Get to know them. The next one might be a content marketing piece, an article or something like that. And then now you're making another phone call. And so at this point, your goal is to engage them, and hopefully they're responsive to you. Because if you've done it right and you've done it in a way that's non-pushy or that's value-based, there's a good chance they're going to be wanting to talk to you at some point, or they're going to be receptive. It's not guaranteed, of course. You may need to do more of this. But the ultimate goal of a sequence is to keep them engaged and do it in a way that really provides value to your brand, but it helps automate the sales process a little bit. So actually, I share on here, learn to write email sequences, autorespondermadness.com. It's a great place to go. I think it's $200 or something like that. And he teaches you to write a series of sequence emails. But I'm not saying you limit it to just emails. You can actually take that information and tie it into other strategies. Now, the sequences I gave here, the follow-up series that I gave you, those can be customized to your comfort level. I'm going to share this deck with you, but I want to make sure that you understand that this is not meant to be a hard and fast rule. There are other ways to do this. There's more aggressive approaches. There's softer approaches. And I could talk to you about that offline if you're interested, but ultimately these are ways that you can actually, hopefully within your comfort level, take this and use this in your own process. So I am in the process of finishing up a book called Ninja Follow-Up. And the idea is to provide a tool that actually gives people in this space and outside of this space tools that allow them to really create value in terms of the message and value in the way that they follow up. So if you would like to get some information on that, you can actually email me at follow-up at actussales.com. That's follow with a hyphen. Or you can just email me at pkirch at actussales.com. There's going to be the book coming out, and then we're developing a training program that will go around with that. So, we've got a couple minutes. I can open it up to questions, but I want to thank you again for the opportunity to share this, because it's something I'm really passionate about and something I truly believe that everyone on this call can become more effective at.
Thank you, Paul. We do have a couple of questions. Or one, if you guys have a question, feel free to click over there on the questions section on the right and type it up, and I'll be happy to read it out. Our first question is, with the follow-up frequency, What are the time spans between the 1 and 2, 2 and 3, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, the PowerPoint actually kind of gives some examples of that. But like for the first email, like if we go back here, I'll back up here. Are you talking about in the sequence itself? Yeah, in terms of the sequencing, if you're doing an automated sequence like this, I mean, I really recommend that these are peppered out at least 1 week apart. You may actually want to spread that out further on, but the initial ones. So, for example, in Autoresponder Madness, his approach is he does it for both B2C and B2B, and he takes people through this really compelling story that he tells through his email series, and that story actually starts with the first one, and then the second one has elements of it. But he does a great job of tying this story in a way, but it's value based, it's intriguing, and you can't wait to see the next one. But he spreads those out initially once every 3 or 4 days, and then it moves to once a week. I actually believe in spreading that out a little bit more if you're doing this automated. Initially, the first couple are going to be a week apart, and then maybe your phone calls a couple days after that second email. And at that point, you spread that out a little bit more, and you start to go every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks or once a month, depending on your comfort level. Some people are afraid to get aggressive because they think they're going to alienate people or scare them off. But you can also get feedback on this. Hey, if you like what I sent, I mean, am I sending it too frequently? Is it too much? Is it too little? And get feedback from people. But I think the first couple, you want about a week gap in there, and then from there you're spreading it out a little bit more.
Perfect. Next question. What's an example of a voicemail you've left that was effective?
A voicemail that I've left that it's effective. If you want, I can send you a cool guide that I wrote. It's just a simple little 4-page document on creating voicemail. Send me an email to pkirch@actussales.com or follow up at actussales.com. I'm happy to share it with you. But a voicemail message has some sort of call to action. If you've got something that's a relevant reason for them to call now, I mean, promotions are great, although in this industry, I know promotions are not necessarily thought highly of. So it's not like you can say, oh, we've got a special offer right now. Now you can. I mean, there's no reason you can't use a promotion, but it's not always going to come across in the way that you probably want it. If you've got some sort of specific call to action, what's a reason for them to call you back? Without it, if it's just, hey, I'm just checking in, can you call me back? They're never going to respond to that. But if it's, hey, this is Paul Kirch with Actus Sales Intelligence. I wanted to share with you that I'm actually going to be speaking on a webinar put on by the Southwest MRA on follow-up strategies, and I'd really like you to be a part of it. Can you call me back and I'll get you that information? See, there's a specific call to action, and your hope is that they're really interested in that, they're intrigued by that, they're going to call you back. So it really depends on your business and what you're out there selling, but ultimately the goal is to get them some sort of call to action that is really relevant and valuable to them. If they don't call you back, just remember you still got that top of mind awareness. But the last thing you want to do is leave them a 1 minute long rambling voicemail that has no direction. So it's a good idea to kind of come up with some strategies before you make the call.
Great. Next question. What is the most common mistake that people make when following up?
Great question. I love that question. Well, there's a few, but I think the most common mistake is not following up enough. And then behind that is not following up in terms of a timeline where they remember you. So I know people that are guilty of making a couple of calls, they get busy, and then they don't follow up for 2 months. Well, that person's kind of forgotten about you. And if anything, if they were interested at one point, they might be even less interested now than they were because they're like, geez, I mean, I must not be that important to you if you haven't followed up. So I'd say it's really the persistence, the fact that you're following up enough, that 8 to 10 times, and then it's the timing and the gap in between.
Great. Next question. Could you address the techniques you've used to renew your relationship with a former client, assuming that the client is former because you got so busy with other work that you couldn't take care of them?
Yeah, that's another great question. I love that. And I've actually had that happen, and I think we all have. I don't know if it's my Midwest roots. I grew up in Nebraska, and my dad was a school teacher. We lived on a farm, and I kind of grew up in this environment where you were always taught to be polite. But I also have always been somebody that believes in honest communication. And I'd say that one of the things that I have leveraged more than anything throughout my career is just being honest. Hey, look, I know it's been a while since we talked, and I owe you an apology. That's my fault. I mean, this relationship's important to me, and it's been a while since we talked, so I'd love to work with you again. You'll find that people are much more responsive to that than some sort of story that's really not believable. So I'd say honesty and just being, somewhat forward and taking responsibility. Those are things that will always be valuable.
Great. Any more questions? So if you have any more questions, feel free to email Paul directly. But before we go, I definitely want to thank Paul for a wonderful, wonderful presentation. Thank you so much for being with us. And I want to remind everyone, if you weren't logged on this morning when we first started, that we have the educational forum coming in Austin, Texas, August 6th through 7th. So feel free to log on to our website and check it out. Thank you so much. You guys have a good week.
Yeah, thanks, Tara, and thanks to Southwest MRA for letting me be a part of this.